Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Brabber and alongside me is Logan Camden. And today we are continuing our NFL season preview content with the AFC South. We almost finished the NFC. If you're wondering why we changed conferences before doing the NFC West, we just want to hold out until all this Ayuk stuff has resolved itself. We don't want to make a Niners prediction that presumes that he's not going to play for them or he is going to play for them, and then it ends up being that the opposite is the case. So we're moving over to the AFC for now, and we're going to the AFC South, Logan, a division that for quite some time I would say has been one of the weakest in football, but that is trending upwards. We have 4 young quarterbacks in this division, 4 talented young quarterbacks. So with that in mind, who is, to you, the best team in this division?
As I predicted last year, I think the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to win this division. And
I like it.
the big question is what we get out of Trevor Lawrence. And we talked about this on our Top 10 QBs episode. I'll reiterate some of these points. This team started out 8-3. It was a really disappointing end to last season. They end the season 1-5. They have an 8-point loss and a chance to win the AFC South in the last week of the season versus the Titans. And Lawrence struggled down the stretch. 254 yards per game, 9 TDs to 7 picks, a passer rating south of 82. But he dealt with a high ankle sprain, a concussion, and a shoulder sprain. Christian Kirk also missed the final 5 games of the season, and he played under one of the worst offensive lines in all of football. I still think that this offensive line is a little weak. They struggled to run block. This was one of the worst run blocking units in the league last season. They ranked number 30 in terms of yards per attempt, but they add Mitch Morrison. I do expect some improvement from some of the young guys, specifically first-round pick from last year, Anton Harrison. And I expect maybe not an MVP breakout kind of year from Trevor Lawrence, but I expect a good year, right? You have Christian Kirk returning. You have Evan Ingram back in the fold this year, and you add in Brian Thomas. They also add in Gabe Davis. Some people will hype up that addition. I frankly think Gabe Davis is pretty overrated. I think he stinks. His hands aren't that great. Not a great route runner. I think Josh Allen made him, to be quite frank. So he's not a needle mover for me.
Talk to him.
But Brian Thomas genuinely is. I really like Christian Kirk as a number 1, and Evan Ingram has been really solid with Trevor Lawrence. So I expect Trevor Lawrence to lead out an above-average offense, and I expect this running game and the offensive line to improve marginally. Where I really expect to lead is defensively. Basically everywhere across this defense. I love the defensive front. You return Josh Allen. You return number 1 pick Trayvon Walker, who's always been great defending the run, but made strides, real strides last year as a pass rusher where he notched 10 sacks. You also add into the fold Eric Armstead, who I think is an absolute stud. And when you're talking about ganging up on one of these guys, you're not going to be able to highlight one of these rushers, right? You're going to have to divert equal attention to all of them. And that's where I think everybody's going to eat. I like this linebacking core with Oluokun and with Devin Lloyd. I think both of those guys are studs. The real area where we need to see improvement from Jacksonville is this pass defense. Carson, they allowed 300-yard passing games to Jake Browning, to Joe Flacco, and to Gardner Minshew last year. Just embarrassing stuff from this Jaguars secondary. They add in Darnell Savage. They add in Ronald Darby, 2 consistent guys. So this also, I will say, I think the Jaguars, this is not me hedging my bets. You asked me who I think the best team in this division is. I probably still think it's the Texans, but I think the Texans division, the Texans schedule is just harder.
It's tough.
One, the teams that they're facing out of their division are going to be really tough. I'll get to that when we talk about the Texans, but also, I don't expect any of these interdivision games to be like pushovers. The Titans I expect to be better. The Colts I expect to be better. And it may not be reflected in these teams' records, but I think they're going to put up more fight in these individual matchups. And so I have the Jaguars finishing with the exact same record as the Texans at 10-7, but I have the Jaguars winning the head-to-head battle between the Texans. So that is why they come atop my division. I expect Trevor Lawrence to be better. I expect to see improvement basically everywhere on this team, from the O-line to everywhere on this defense. And so they're going to eke out this division. That being said, I probably still like the Texans a little bit more as a real playoff contender, but I have the Jags coming out atop this division.
I considered picking the Jags to win the division, and I don't dislike the take because you think about what a disaster last year was, what a meltdown it was. They still finished 9-8. And they finished the year ice cold, losing 5 of 6, but that directly coincides with Trevor Lawrence hurting his ankle in week 13. That is when the skid starts. And from that point forward, he gives you just 9 touchdowns to 7 picks, 6.5 yards per attempt. Clearly took a step back. It was not a great season from him end to end. It was underwhelming. I thought we would see him take more of a leap into that bona fide elite status. And he didn't do that. But he struggled the most when he was dealing with that ankle injury. I do think that the level that he is playing at will be big in determining the success and the ceiling of this team, because we view him as one of the most talented up-and-coming quarterbacks. I mean, he was a prodigious talent as a prospect, every tool you could look for in the book. And although I think we both believe he's better than the raw numbers last year would indicate, we still don't know exactly how much of his potential he is going to realize this coming season. And I do think there are some areas where he needs to improve. Taking care of the football. 21 turnovers this past year. 14 picks, 7 fumbles. He has consistently struggled with the fumbles specifically. That's got to be better. Accuracy, I think, is the only real area as a thrower of the football that he needs to improve. And I think that that's part of the interceptions as well. Just consistently putting the ball on target. And I do think sometimes he can come in a little bit hot with his throws. For the most part, I think his arm allows him to make throws that other guys can't, but I do think that there is a little bit of volatility. Sometimes his ball is just harder to catch because it is thrown so hard, and I think that chemistry with receivers is another area that I'm going to be monitoring this year. This isn't solely on Trevor, but we're seeing an overhaul in that group. Calvin Ridley is out. You're bringing in Gabe Davis. You're bringing in Brian Thomas Jr. in the first round. We'll see how all those things develop. He has all the tools. My concerns, though, are not just how much does Trevor improve, because I definitely expect him to be better than last year. I don't know that I'm as high on him as I was going into last year, but I think that he will have a significantly better season. I still don't like the offensive line, and I worry about the run game. This was one of the least efficient rushing attacks in football last year, and I still really dislike the coaching staff here. I don't like Doug Peterson. I do not like Press Taylor. I don't like the play calling that we have seen from the Jags last year especially. And when you look at the changes in the receiver room, there's upside for it to be improvement, because Ridley wasn't that great last year, but I do think he was better than Gabe Davis will be. I am, like you, not a Gabe Davis guy. He's not a good route runner. He doesn't have good hands, and he's a Josh Allen merchant. I like Brian Thomas Jr., but he is something of a project. I think that the explosiveness is there. The big play potential is there. He's got to improve his physicality, has to improve, to me, his legitimacy as a down-to-down, high-volume NFL receiver in year one. So my concerns aren't about Trevor so much. I do think that he'll take a step forward this year. It's just that the things around him, to me, aren't looking any better offensively than they were last year. Defensively, I'm with you. I really like the defensive front. I think adding Eric Armstead to a group with Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker, who was a good bit better last year, still can refine his game, but was much better than he was as a rookie. That's all good. I like the linebackers. The secondary is improved, but I do still think it's a below average unit. So I do think the Jags are a little bit better than last year, and considering how things came crashing down at the end, maybe that should be reflected in the win total. But I have them winning the same amount of games as last year. I have them winning 9 games, and I have them second in this division.
I mean, I think you make a great point about Trevor Lawrence there. It's going to take a Herculean effort from Trevor for this team to exceed their expectations. And in a lot of ways, he's been kind of the only guy floating the ship these past couple of years. That's why he bears the responsibility. I do think there are areas he needs to improve. The turnovers, a huge part of Trevor's improvement. Yeah. Taking easy stuff. I think Trevor's a guy that likes to take shots. He likes to take those risks. He needs to do a better job of just taking what the defense gives him sometimes and conceding those underneath routes. But in a lot of ways, I do think it's a situation too, right? You don't have an effective running game. You don't have a good offensive line, which means that Trevor Lawrence is just covering up a lot of holes on your football team. And I think this defense did him a big disservice last year by not helping him out basically at all. I mean, surrendering a ton of explosive plays down the field. And so that's why I think it's going to be reflected in the win total this year. I think that if we see marginal improvements from every other area around this team, and if Trevor can also make those improvements, you're looking at a really good team. Now, I don't consider the Jaguars to be real contenders. I do consider the Texans to be real contenders. And so it's not reflected in my division standings here because I have the Jags winning the head-to-head battle. I have both of these teams winning the same amount of games. But I do think they can win this division, and I think it's going to be close. But it all hinges on Trevor Lawrence. I mean, if we get bad Trevor, the Trevor that we saw struggling in the second half of the season, lingering injuries, taking too many shots, this team's going to falter. It all hinges on Trevor. It really reminds me, Carson, of like L.A., with the Herculean task that Justin Herbert has had trying to make up for all the Chargers' faults. If Trevor is not in that above average, top half of the league, the top 10 QB range, this is a team that could very well bottom out and win 6 to 7 games. That being said, though, I do have a level of faith in Trevor Lawrence. I'm not selling my stock whatsoever. I had him as one of my top 10 QBs. Like I said, I don't know if we're going to see – I don't expect an MVP-level season from Trevor Lawrence like I predicted last season.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to see him change a lot of people's minds and get closer to where people projected him to be last year, because I think a lot of people are out on Trevor Lawrence. I'm not a part of that crew, man. I still really believe in Trevor, and I think he is a franchise quarterback in this league.
Absolutely, and I'm with you. I unequivocally would have paid him. It's not about concerns with Trevor. It's about how elite is he at this stage, because I don't know that he is yet one of those like singular transformative guys. I had him just outside my top 10 quarterbacks as my number 11 guy. Definitely a franchise guy, but not a superstar at this stage. And it's about the concerns around him. And another reason that I don't have them improving in terms of regular season wins, even though I do think that they're a slightly better football team all around, is that the schedule is definitely harder for the Texans, but it's not easy for the Jags. And the Jags did get off to a bit of a Mickey Mouse 8-3 last year. Like, Trevor's injury certainly did not help, but they didn't have many impressive wins at all. In fact, really their only good wins of the year are a weird game against Buffalo, and they beat the Texans by a field goal. The other good teams that they faced got pretty much shut down by the Chiefs, got blown out by the Texans in their other meeting, got destroyed by the Niners, lost to the Browns, got handled by the Ravens. So I don't think that they were as good as their record suggested to start last year. And the start of this season, dude, I mean, we can just go week by week to Miami, Browns, to Buffalo, to Houston, Indianapolis. That's not an easy game. At Chicago, I think Chicago is going to be legitimately good this year. Pats, that's easy. Then Packers at Eagles. Vikings, that's not even a walkover. At Lions, that's just getting you to the bye there, man. I would go as far as to say that they're underdogs in more than half of those games, and then it lightens up in the home stretch, but I don't think that they are really getting a friendly deal in terms of the schedule either. So you have the Jags winning the division, but you are higher on Houston. Why is that?
I think they made more improvements in the offseason. And also, I do want to emphasize their schedule because I think it's absolutely brutal what they're going to have to face too. You've got this is their out-of-division schedule, not all the teams included, but they've got the Bills, they've got Green Bay, they've got the Jets, they've got Detroit, they've got Dallas, they've got Miami, they've got Kansas City, and they've got Baltimore. Like I said, I think Houston...
Ridiculous.
It's super. I mean, that's what comes with winning your own division. The next year, you got to expect that top dog schedule, and the Texans are going to have to show it. Now, I do think they improved more though, and there's just some things that I trust a little bit more about Houston. First of all, offensively, Nico Collins is back, Tank Dell is back, home run hitters. Dalton Schultz is back. That dude is a rock solid tight end. They were the number 13 scoring offense last year. They had the number 8 passing offense overall. Into the fold, you bring Stefon Diggs. And you bring in Joe Mixon. Now, I do want to add a bit of a caveat with both of those moves. I'm probably not as high as most other people are with both of those moves. I don't think Stefon Diggs is the wideout that he was in Buffalo at his absolute apex. I think Diggs has regressed, not a ton, but a little bit. Yeah. Now, I still think he's going to be productive here. You're putting him alongside, again, a great offense. When you have all of this collateral talent, defenses can't load up on a single guy. So I think everybody's going to eat. I just want to be clear that I don't think Diggs is the Diggs that he was a couple of years ago. Joe Mixon. I just don't think is, people hear Joe Mixon.
Yeah.
He's been productive over the last couple of
Fantasy merchant.
Fantasy merchant
Carries
for
merchant.
sure. I don't think Mixon is at the level that he was a couple of years ago. Is he going to be an improvement from the likes of Dameon Pierce and Devin Singletary? I think he's a step up from Pierce. Singletary, I don't know. Singletary was legitimately good for Houston last season, so he'll probably be on the same level. That being said, I expect this high-octane offense to be even better next year. And then you look at the defense, they lose Grenard, but they add in Danielle Hunter, who had 16.5 sacks last year and is third in sacks per game since 2018. The two guys above him, Myles Garrett and TJ Watt. That's great company. You also add in Danico Autry, who has been really consistent. Last year he has 12.5 sacks. He's got 8 sacks in each of his last 3 seasons. So he's as consistent as they come. So I look at the rest of this roster. I'm a little worried about the linebacking core. You have a little bit of an overhaul there. You lose Blake Cashman and Denzel Perriman. Good run stuffers, good tacklers, and I like the cornerback room. I like Desmond King as your nickel and slot corner, and I like Derek Stingley as the lead guy. Hopefully he's healthy this year. And they add in Lassiter. So I just think they've improved basically across the board. Offensively, I think they've got more weapons. The only areas I'm really concerned with is the linebacking core and the secondary. But I think CJ Stroud's going to get even better next year. He had one of the greatest rookie campaigns we've ever seen. If you've been watching, I mean, me and Carson both believe it's the best rookie quarterback season we've ever seen in terms of efficiency, clutch time performance, making big-time ballsy throws.
Yeah.
Stroud's got it all. To me, it's really about how great this linebacking core and secondary can be that's going to determine this ceiling and how much better CJ Stroud can get. So I think they're a real contender. Basically, it all comes down to how brutal this schedule is. I just don't expect them to make it out completely unscathed. They're going to lose probably half of these games against Buffalo, Green Bay, New York, Detroit, Dallas, Miami, Kansas City, and Baltimore. That's 4 losses right there. And then you couple that with the fact that this is not a cupcake of a division, right? Tennessee and Indianapolis, I think, are definitively the 2 bottom teams in this division, but you're not just going to walk over them. So I expect them to drop probably 1 game from each of their division rivals, Jacksonville, Indianapolis, and Tennessee. And that's where their record's going to be 10-7. But I think this is a very talented team, and they are on my Super Bowl bubble. I think CJ Stroud is that kind of quarterback, and he doesn't have to make up for the kind of roster holes that Trevor Lawrence does. So, I'm going to reiterate, like I said with the Jacksonville segment, I have Jacksonville winning this division, but I wholeheartedly think Houston is a much better contender.
So I do have Houston winning the division outright. I have them winning 10 games like you, and I could have gone for 11 if not for this schedule, which I really do think is one of the toughest in the league. There is a lot to like about Houston's offseason. There's a lot to like about Houston's team. They're a young team that is inherently just trending upwards because so much of their premier talent is young. If it's the receiving core, CJ Stroud, Will Anderson, of course, who had an awesome season last year. D'Amico Ryans, I believe in deeply as a coach. They maintain Bobby Slowick. There's a lot of continuity from a team that won a playoff game last year, finished the regular season very strong, and is very young and trending upwards. I love the receiving core with Stefon Diggs in there. I'm with you. I think that Diggsy has regressed. He was a top 5 receiver in football a couple years ago. He is not that anymore. He's probably more like a top 20 receiver. And I think that the Bills are not necessarily losing sleep over the loss of him. And I thought that he really struggled to produce down the home stretch of last season. He was outproduced by Khalil Shakir and Dalton Kincaid over the last 7 or 8 weeks of the season, including the playoffs. In the situation there, the chemistry just wasn't right anymore. So it made sense for me that the Bills moved on. It also made sense, though, that the Texans would want to go out there and pick him up because he's a great win-now talent for a team in their situation. And, I mean, it's not just the top of this unit that is ridiculous, right? Diggs, Nico, Tank, if we include Schultz in there as the tight end. That is easily among the handful of best receiving cores in football. The depth, dude, is also awesome. Noah Brown as your 5th target? I like Noah Brown. Robert Woods, Bobby Trees, the man can always get on the field and produce and get open enough. John Mechie, potential dynamic talent. I mean, we're talking about their 5th, 6th, 7th receiving target. So I do think that that depth is awesome. And I do think that Stroud will only be better after another year. I think maybe we see that the turnover numbers go up a little bit. I did think that he was a little bit fortunate in that regard last year. I think he takes good care of the football, but he took a lot of chances and the turnovers didn't reflect that. But I love CJ Stroud. I do think he's the best quarterback in this division. He has surpassed Lawrence to me. I just think this is a guy who has his head screwed on straight, who can make plays outside the pocket, who can use his legs, not at an elite level, but at a good level, who has good arm talent, and who processes the game at a really high level, who does hit on those shot plays last year as much as anybody in football, basically. But I do have concerns with the Texans. I have concerns offensively in terms of personnel. The offensive line I still don't think is good here, and I thought that it was impressive that CJ was able to overcome what was not a very good offensive line last year that was also injured and I would say improved as the year went along, but was never good. And I do worry about the run game. They were 29th in yards per attempt last year. Joe Mixon, for me, does not move the needle at all. He's gotten a lot of touches in Cincinnati. That's why he's produced. He hasn't been an efficient rusher in a very long time. I don't think he's a particularly good running back. So I still think the offense should absolutely improve because the passing game should just be better. It should be, in my opinion, a decent bit better than last year. But I worry about the offense being elite with those issues on the line, with those issues in the run game. Defensively, I like a lot of what they've done. I really, really love the front with Hunter, adding Mario Edwards Jr. Will Anderson, I think, is an absolute stud. They were 5th in pressure rate last year. They should easily be able to replicate that this year. It's a better front. I am worried about the linebackers, though. Perriman is a moderate loss. Cashman, to me, is a big loss. I thought that he was really, really stellar in that unit. And I think the secondary is above average. So I expect a solid defense, improved offense, but not elite. And if you were looking for potential signs of regression, there are some here with Houston. They were plus 10 in the turnover margin last year. Already mentioned, I don't know that CJ will take such impeccable care of the football again this year. They only beat 2 playoff teams throughout the regular season last year, that being the Steelers and the Bucks. Your 2 favorite playoff teams, Logan, but, you know, if I may speak frankly, bottom tier playoff teams, and they only had a plus 1.4 point differential per game. So that's why I can't go out here and say, even though they added a dynamic talent like Stefon Diggs, even though their personnel improved, even though the young talent is trending upwards, that they're going to win 11, 12 games. I don't view them as a world beater. I do think, I mean, they did a great job down the home stretch of last season. They clutched out some important games, and they won a playoff game, for God's sakes. And I do have so much faith in CJ executing, and that's one of the reasons that I like them more than Jacksonville. I also think that they are more talented, especially in terms of the guys who are important to empowering their star young quarterback to succeed. But I think some people want to put them just firmly in that Super Bowl contending camp. I'm not quite there because I think last year was very exciting, but they weren't an elite team last year, that's for sure. And I don't know that they have taken a big enough leap forward for me to say that they're elite. They're very, very good, but they're in that tier 2 for me.
Yeah, they're good playoff contenders. The thing
For
that
sure.
would leapfrog them into legitimate contendership for me, if we saw a real increase from the secondary, if the offensive line surprises us and they can actually run the ball this year, you need to have that component when it comes playoff time. Or if CJ Stroud makes that legitimate MVP level leap. If we see that kind of jump from Stroud, like the only reason that I'm not ready to put him there yet is just because he was so good as a rookie. Like to expect him to make another kind of leap from, you know, I mean, I already think he's a top 10 QB, but again, to anticipate that kind of MVP level leap in year 2, I just think you're asking a lot. I think CJ Stroud's going to be damn good. I think he's going to be better than last year. And if he does make that leap, I'll go ahead and I'll jump the shark. I'll say that they are a real Super Bowl contender if he leaps up to MVP level contention. I just don't think he's going to be that kind of QB in year 2. That's a lot to expect from CJ, in my opinion.
Agreed. I mean, he played an exceptionally clean season of football for a rookie. Can't really improve that much in that category. And the physical tools for him are good. They're not elite. They're not tier 1. So I'm with you. I do think he'll be a little better this year. I wouldn't expect an explosion compared to where he was last year. If he did, I mean, that would just be ridiculous. He'd be on an insane trajectory. But sometimes that second year as a starter is a little bit harder than the first. Not normally for a rookie, but things went very well for CJ and the Texans last year. I expect them to go well again this year, but maybe not seeing a massive improvement. Been hungry for some college football? Well, we finally get a taste this weekend. Don't miss any of the action. Jump in at DraftKings Sportsbook.
It's a small but mighty slate of games for Week 0, including a big matchup in Ireland. This is going to be DraftKings' biggest college football season to date. Enjoy the ride now all the way through the expanded playoffs. Plus, all newbies getting into the college spirit, here's something extra special. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly.
Score big with DraftKings all college football season long. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code NERDS. That's code NERDS for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Okay, let's move on to the bottom half here, Logan. Who is the third best team in this division, in your opinion?
So I have Indianapolis and Tennessee finishing both with the same record. I think I think Tennessee is going to be better in the division. That's why I have them finishing in this third spot. I have them both finishing 6-11. It might be a little underwhelming, but like I said, man, this is a really competitive division, and I don't really think any of these teams' schedules are cakewalks. Tennessee has a complete overhaul. They have a completely new coaching staff. Brian Callahan in at head coach, Nick Holes in at offensive coordinator, and Denard Wilson in at defensive coordinator. They also potentially could have 13 brand new starters in 2024, as I've mentioned in all of these previews. Any kind of turnover like that in an organization is a little scary to me with that many moving pieces. Now, I like the offensive additions Tennessee made, adding in Calvin Ridley, adding in Tyler Boyd, adding in Tony Pollard. You already have DeAndre Hopkins. I don't love this offensive line. This was one of the worst O-lines in football last year. I think they could be average next year. They draft J.C. Latham. They signed Lloyd Cushenberry. They're going to move Skoronski to inside. I think that is going to be really beneficial for him. But I do like this offense. They're going to be spread out. They're going to be in the shotgun. And I like the union of Callahan and Levis. I think Callahan can elevate Will Levis. I think he can legitimately make him, an all right quarterback. And that's going to be the real determinant of if this team is going to be really good or really bad. It's going to be Will Levis. He's got a big arm. I like his physical tools. The boy's a little reckless, man. Will Levis plays football like a wild man.
Yeah.
And that is what scares me a little bit. Will Levis can just play a little out of control. I think he's going to take some risks. I think he's going to be aggressive. And when you were looking at a young quarterback that is going to take some risks and be aggressive and use that big arm of his, there's going to be some great games where I think Will Levis is going to pop. I also think there's going to be some bad games where he's probably turning the ball over a lot and losing you some games. On the flip side, I like this defensive front, but I really worry about the pass rush. They were 27th in pressure rate last season, and I do worry about this secondary. This was a bad secondary last year. I mean, every game you watch, it's somebody getting dotted up. The rock is getting slung on. So I think this will be an encouraging season from Levis, and I think we will see him grow. But as I've said, there's a lot of roster and coaching turnover. I think it's really hard when you're putting this kind of burden on a young quarterback.
Yeah.
Will Levis is going to be expected to carry this offense, and that's where I really worry about him is Tony Pollard's a good runner, but this is not a good offensive line. So I don't expect Tony to have an amazing year where he can really carry the weight of this offense. And even though Will Levis has really good receiving talent, again, you're going to be asking this guy to make all the throws, to make all the plays, to get all the third down conversions, to do everything in the red zone, and I just think it's a lot. So I think this is an average O-line and an average defense, and when you put all this together, it's just a slightly below average team. I expect Tennessee to basically be competitive in all of their football games. But I expect them to lose a lot too. And so that's why I have them finishing 6-11. Yeah, I don't really know anything that this team is going to do great this upcoming season. I think they're slightly below average, and that's why they're going to finish here at 6-11. And again, anytime there's this kind of roster turnover, I get a little nervous because there's just so many moving pieces.
I'm lower on the Titans than you are,
Wow.
and I actually see a pretty big gap between them and the Colts, which is really interesting. And I think a lot of that comes down to how you view these two young quarterbacks, both of whom were rookies last year, both of whom we only got to see a fraction of the season as a starter, more Levis. Anthony Richardson, of course, getting hurt for the Colts. And I do like Levis's physical tools. I don't really know how you could not like his physical tools. The arm is very strong. The mobility is solid. But I still think his accuracy and his decision making has to improve a lot for him to be a solid starter in this league. I know that some people are really, really high on Levis right now, and I understand it because there's a few throws that he made last year that you look at and you just go, yeah, there's only 5 or 6 dudes who could make that throw. That's pretty incredible stuff. I also rewatched every throw that he made in a few games last year, specifically in the Dolphins game where they end up leading a valiant comeback, Tennessee does, and they win that game from down 2 touchdowns in the last few minutes of the game. That's impressive. At the same time, Will Levis should have thrown 7 interceptions in that game, bro. I swear to God, the number of balls that the defense got a hand on, whether it was a miscommunication with the receiver, whether it was him being under pressure, rushed to get the ball out too fast, if it was him trying to throw into too tight of a window, if it was him just being inaccurate, there is a lot of dangerous balls, more so than I think were reflected in terms of his pure turnover totals last year. He also threw a pick 6 on a screen, which was pretty remarkable, and not totally on him. Like, that's the other thing here. It's what you said. He's not being put in a position to succeed, in my opinion. The Titans have invested in the offensive line. They've gone first round the last 2 years. That's good. That's the right approach. I still expect it to be a rough unit, and that's what really concerns me. The inexperienced, raw quarterback with a well below average O-line, with a receiving core that's improved, but not great. And I think we kind of have underestimated how much Derrick Henry has just carried the Titans in recent years. And not necessarily the great team offense these last couple years, but just producing with the volume he does, producing with even solid efficiency on the ground behind this line. I mean, the line fell off, right? Because in that 2019 range, it was amazing back when Tannehill was having his best seasons. They had Lewan and they had Conklin. They were loaded. And then just bit by bit, it has regressed and regressed. And I think that Pollard, although he is good, is a pretty clear downgrade from Derrick Henry, who is still, to me, a top 3 runner in football. So that's where I look at everything offensively, and I don't like what I'm seeing. From what was a bad offense last year, the receiving talent has improved. It's not necessarily moving the needle. I'm really worried about the line. I'm worried about the run game. Defensively, they weren't good last year. They were 24th in yards per drive allowed last year, 21st, I believe, in points allowed per drive. They have a couple studs. Jeffrey Simmons up front, adding L'Jarius Sneed, absolute stud. The rest of this defense is just not so good, though. So you talk about struggling to find where are they good. I feel the same way, but probably just more so. I just look at a lot of units, a lot of aspects of this team, and I go below average, below average, below average, below average. Basically every aspect of this team. And when you stack that on top of each other, one after another, leaves you thinking this team's probably going to win 4 or 5 games, especially if you have questions about the quarterback position, which I very much still do.
And there's normally a reason if a team hits the reset button. You know what I mean? You're not just having this kind of boom. You're not having this kind of explosive turnover if you think you're close. Obviously, the Titans didn't. Like I said, 13 potential new starters is huge. Losing a cornerstone of your franchise in Derrick Henry, completely new coaching staff. There are massive red flags with the Titans, and so I understand. I completely understand. And on the flip side of that, we're expecting Will Levis to be okay. Man, if Will Levis crumbles, I don't know what happens. I think the Titans could bottom out. And again, I know a lot of people are going to look at this receiving talent that he has and maybe expect a massive year. Again, man, you're just expecting a young quarterback in his first real year of starting to carry an entire offense. That's tough, man. That's really tough to shoulder that kind of load.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. I do think that Levis is going to be pretty easily a bottom 10 starter in this league. I think he's somewhere in that 25th to 32 range. There's a lot of good quarterbacks out there. That's part of it, but I just worry about the consistency. I worry about the decision making. I worry about the management of the game, and I worry a lot about the situation doing him zero favors. So you view the Colts in a very similar vein to the Titans. Why is that? Why do you have them at the bottom of this division?
So there are some parallels, interestingly enough, I think, between Tennessee and Indianapolis. One, as you mentioned, the young quarterback, right?
Mm-hmm.
The difference is that Anthony Richardson is going to have a running game, hopefully, to rely on. Better offensive line than Tennessee. Jonathan Taylor was out for the start of last year. When he was healthy, was one of the best guys in the NFL and has consistently been one of the best rushers of the football in the league. My thing with the Colts, one, it comes down to scheduling. I think all of these teams have a really tough schedule. And there's only 4 games where I would favor Indianapolis confidently. At Minnesota, at New England, at Denver, at the Giants. Those are games that I expect Indianapolis to win. Every other one to me is a toss-up. And I really am worried about Anthony Richardson. Now, if Jonathan Taylor can carry the offense and Richardson can just float the boat, if you can, and if the running game gets established too, I think there is a higher ceiling that I see with the offense where you can basically, run your offense through the running game, where you can set up read options and design runs for Anthony Richardson. I'm just not as confident in Richardson being a star as maybe other people are, right? Great physical tools, but he's kind of a complete unknown, right? He had a shoulder injury last year. He started 4 games. He only finished 2 of them. I think there's going to be a lot of learning. There's going to be a big learning curve, and I think there's going to be some growing pains with Richardson. He wasn't the most polished passer in college, where I do like him in this offense. I think Steichen, the way you saw him that year with Hurts, designing easy things for him to pick apart, I think he's going to do some of that. But I also think we're going to see Richardson take some chances, probably have a pretty high turnover number in this first year, really starting. And I'm not a big fan of the weapons. Pittman's okay. I like that they added in Mitchell. They're solid, but they're not great. So I don't love the receiving talent. I think there's going to be some growing pains with Richardson. And I don't love this defense. I think this is one of the weakest linebacking cores in football. They got good run stuffers, but I worry about them in coverage. And that's a bigger issue when you look at the back end of this defense. I really worry about this secondary. They had the number 28 scoring defense last year. They were number 25 in defensive points per drive. And the only strength is this pass rush. Where if this team is going to win games, it's going to be on the back of a great rushing attack, and it's going to be on a great defensive front. They were just 22nd in pressure rate last season, but now with DeForest Buckner and Pay, you also return Samson Ebukam. They add in Latu, who was the first defensive player drafted. If we see a leap from the pass rush in the front, I could see this team maybe winning 8 to 9 games. And it's going to be controlled football, methodical, running the hell out of the ball, Richardson and Taylor, a nasty ground attack, and it's going to be this defensive front stopping teams at the line of scrimmage and really getting a ton of pressure home. But the reason I have them at 6 wins, I don't like this back end whatsoever. I'm really nervous about the linebackers and the secondary. I think there's going to be some growing pains with Anthony Richardson. I don't love the receiving core. And this is a bone-crushing schedule. This team really overachieved last season with Gardner Minshew. I just think that we're going to see a little bit of regression, and I think that Richardson's going to have some growing pains. That's really where my concerns are with this team.
That's fair. They were a fake 9-8 last year. We can be real about that. A very, very sneaky 9-8, but not an impressive 9-8. Not a tough schedule whatsoever. I do think I'm higher on Anthony Richardson than you, though. And that's not to say that I expect him to be a polished, well-oiled machine, top half quarterback this year, a top 15, 16 starter. But I definitely like him more than Levis. I think his accuracy has to improve. I think his consistency in terms of going through his progressions, making the right reads with the football has to improve. But the raw talent with him is absolutely absurd. And I was impressed last year with what we did see from him in terms of his ability as a thrower, in terms of his accuracy. As a prospect, he was discussed like he was going to be a Josh Allen level project, right? A Lamar Jackson level project in terms of their accuracy as college throwers. I thought that he came out the gates looking more polished than either of those guys did. That's not to say that he is polished, But when you have all the arm talent he does, you have all the running ability that he does, which is another huge separator between him and a Levis. We are talking about an absolute freak athlete, freak runner of the football. That makes me optimistic, man. I do think that there's real star potential in this young man, and he's not going to reach it this year. I don't think he's a star this year, but I do think that he could be 2 years from now, and I do have more confidence in him than I do in a Levis. He's definitely important to determining their ceiling. I think the receiving core is pretty solid. I like Pittman. I think he's a pretty legit number one. Not one of the better number ones, but a fine one. He'd be a really, really good number two. But in the aggregate, Josh Downs I really do like, man. He's a speedy little playmaker, and he was productive last year. A.D. Mitchell can definitely explode. Not the most consistent receiver yet. I don't love his hands. I don't love his physicality, but he's a big play threat for sure. And Pittman is very reliable down to down. So there's some speed in here. There's some explosive play potential. I do expect the run game to be good. It was solid last year. I think it'll be even better with a fully healthy Taylor, hopefully. And the offensive line is elite. I mean, that's a big, big difference between the Colts and the Titans. Defense wasn't great last year, but I really do like the defensive line, as you mentioned, especially adding Latu to this unit. I don't love the linebackers, but I think the defense overall is solid. So I have them winning 8 games. I think 7 or 8 is the right range. I don't really see that playoff push because I'm not confident enough in the back end of the defense and because I don't think there's enough help around Richardson. But I think Richardson is better, and I think he has a lot more help than a Levis. So that's where I do see a pretty big gap between these two teams in this division.
The one thing I'm nervous about with Richardson, and I know this got beat like a dead horse last season, is just him taking these shots. Richardson's got to get better at going down, at getting out of bounds, just not getting beat up, because I am worried that Steichen loves his designed runs. I mean, he weaponized Jalen Hurts, which is why I'm encouraged for the long term. It's not just Richardson's talent. The best things that you can give, and that's why there is real upside with the Colts. I'll hedge my bets a little bit here. The best thing that you can give a young quarterback, a running game, a solid defense, and a good offensive coordinator. You've got 2 of the 3 here. You've got a really good OC.
Offensive line.
And an O-line.
Line's got to be in there.
You've got a good running game. You've got an O-line. You've got a pretty good OC. I have questions about the defense. I think that they can maximize what you can get out of Anthony Richardson because of Shane Steichen's brilliance. Like, again, he maximized Jalen Hurts. And obviously, they are worlds apart as quarterbacks, right? Hurts is just more polished. Even though he struggled last season, I do think Hurts is a more polished quarterback than Richardson. But there's no doubt in my mind that if there's going to be somebody that can turn Richardson into a star and bring him along as he builds the other parts of his game, the accuracy, the decision-making, the progressions, reading the field, all of that stuff that will make him an elite quarterback if he can put it together, it is Shane Steichen to me. That's the guy that can make Anthony Richardson a star. That is why I like this situation for AR. I just think there's going to be a few more growing pains as a young passer, and I am legitimately worried about this guy getting hurt. I think Richardson has to make that conscious decision. I know he's built like a brick shithouse. Richardson is huge, man. He is big body. But you're also going up against a bunch of other rocked up dudes every game. And you just don't want to see
I don't know about that.
Hold up.
That seems a little bit crazy.
He's going to have to get better at taking those shots. But I do see that kind of ceiling. But again, tough schedule. I worry about Richardson missing a couple of games. I'm not as high on this defense as you are. But I like the ingredients here. There's a lot of ingredients that encourage me about Indianapolis with this team long term and for this season.
And he's young, man. He's a fresh 22. I'm in on Richardson. I would certainly rather have Richardson than Bryce Young. No offense, Bryce, but
and I want to be clear about something too. I'd also rather have Richardson than Will Levis.
How would you rank the quarterbacks in this division then?
Stroud, Lawrence, Richardson, Levis.
Agreed. Is Richardson closer to Lawrence or is he closer to Levis? Not
right
for
now,
this year, for potential. For long term. How you expect him to end up. How much you'd like to have him as the quarterback of your team.
Probably Lawrence.
I agree.
I'd rather have him than Fields or Russell Wilson. That's for damn sure.
Well, that's for damn sure, buddy. But unfortunately, you can't make that swap today. Sorry about that, pal, but I really do think he's a crazy raw talent. And I get it. You got to see it refined. But it's like you say, dude, you get the right coach in there. You get the right personnel in there. And you see the promising signs early. It can come together fast, and it can come together in a scary way. And I definitely see that potential with Anthony Richardson. So, there you have it, folks. All of our thoughts on the AFC South. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, the good news is there is plenty more Nerd Sesh content. You can find all of our shows previewing the NFL season on our YouTube channel. You can also find all of our NBA content, all of our trivia content on our YouTube channel and across audio platforms. You can check us out across social, TikTok, Instagram at NerdSesh, Twitter at Nerd_Sesh. If you want to check out our clips from the show, see some of the graphics that we make on the show based off of lists, see, of course, our original content for social trivia stuff there. That's across all our social handles. You can check out our merch at thevolume.com. You can join our Discord. The link to that is at the link tree across our social media bios. And if you want, I think I said everything. I don't think there's anything left. Is there, Logan? I guess.
Because a clean wrap.
So if you want, you can check us out in all of those places. So with that, as always, appreciate you guys. I have been Carson Brabber.
I have been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.